first of all, let us tell you that it is a privilege for us to be here with you today, and on behalf of our school, we would like to tell you how grateful we are. And as you may know, we are involved in the Roots and Shoots program at the Jane Goodaall Institute in Rome, and we're also working on a school project aimed at the empowerment of girls in the field of science and technology. So this is why our questions will also be focused on that issue.
Okay, fantastic.
So the first question is...
Can I know who your names are first?
Yeah, I'm Federica.
I'm Federica too.
Two Federicas?
Yeah.
That's easy.
Luna.
My name is Aleida.
Valeria.
Okay, I won't remember them, but two Federicas are right.
Okay. So the first question is, when did you first discover that you were interested in science?
Well, I wasn't actually interested in science. I was interested in becoming a naturalist. I was interested in animals and their behavior from the time I popped out of the womb, ever since I was a tiny little girl. And my mother discovered me very curious about earthworms when I was 1.5 years old. And so the science part of it came much later, after I'd been to Gombe, after I'd been about 2 years with the chimps. My mentor, Louis Leakey, said I had to get a degree and made me do a PhD, even though I'd never been to college. So I was thrown into science, the deep end, but I always wanted to be a naturalist.
How did your idea of your future at the very beginning of your studies develop in time?
Well, as I say, I began wanting to be a naturalist. And then I had to get my PhD in animal behavior. And once I understood about how to express myself in a scientific way, I became very fascinated in analyzing the data. And that was when I was about 27, 28 years old. So I went to Gombe when I was 26.
And have you ever felt you had to sacrifice something important for the sake of your studies?
No, I've had to sacrifice the studies for the sake of trying to save the chimps. It's the other way around. Living out there in the forest was the best time of my life. No sacrifice of any sort.
And do you agree with the claim that women in science and technology are fewer because they are discriminated on the basis of their gender? And is it a country that really fosters gender equality?
Well, it's certainly true that women have had a very tough time in making their way in science, particularly the hard sciences like chemistry and physics, because there has been this attitude that those are things that men should do and not women. But I think one of the reasons why women haven't been more engaged and interested is because of science being perceived as a cold and hard science, and that you shouldn't have any emotional involvement with your subjects. And that has led to terrible things like the awful experiments that are done on monkeys and dogs, just because science says, well, you know, these are just animals, they're mere animals, and we can use them to maybe improve human health, which usually isn't the case. But I think that any girl, any woman who's worthy of having that sex doesn't like that sort of thing. And I think as more women have made their way into this field, so the science has become softer. It's now okay to talk about animals having personalities, minds and emotions. And so people doing these things in labs are thinking about it and thinking of animals in a different way.
Can you tell us about an instance where you felt discriminated as a woman scientist?
Well, right at the beginning, I was written off by, strict science as a geographic cover girl. And they said, well, she's only getting this attention because she's got nice legs. At the time, I thought I didn't really care, but after a bit, I found I did care. But then, at that time, when these things were said, when people didn't believe tool using because I didn't have a degree and I hadn't been to college, it was right, I hadn't been to college, and I wasn't a proper scientist. But whether the reaction would have been the same if I'd been a man, I don't know. Maybe they would never have said things like that. Can't tell.
And Can you tell us about an instance in which you have to reconcile your private life and your work, and how did you do that?
Well, since I began traveling 300 days a year, it's very hard to have any kind of private life at all. And so I do get to see my family twice a year when I get to Tanzania. That's my son and my grandchildren. I get to see my sister quite often because she's at the house we grew up in together in England, and that's where I go between all these crazy trips. And we own the house jointly, but she lives in it with her family. So you can't really, it's very hard to balance what I do with any kind of, I don't seem to have a private life anymore at all. People always know where I am, the internet catches you, emails pile up. So it's tough to have a private life. I do my best.
What would be your advice to a young woman who would like to succeed in the world of science?
I would give that young woman the same advice my mother gave me, which is if you really want to do it, and you really have to want to do it because the competition is great, especially in animal behavior. Everybody wants to do it, and the chance of jobs are getting fewer and fewer. And, so, but if you really want to do it, then you're going to have to work extremely hard, take advantage of opportunity. Don't feel you've got to follow a straight and narrow path. You might have to veer off and do something else, but keep the goal in mind. And here's an opportunity. Yes, I can get closer that way, and never give up.
And we wanted to ask you if you could give us an example of a moment of personal crisis during your career.
A moment what?
A personal crisis.
Personal crisis. Well, the worst crisis that happened in the whole of my career, really, was when 4 of my students were kidnapped from Gombe and taken over the lake to Congo by a rebel group, and we didn't know what had happened or where they were. And as a result of that, Stanford and the funding agencies, because I was working with Stanford students, they cut off all funding, and so I was left with no money. And Gombe had, we have all our field staff, they had to be paid, and it was a very, very difficult time. And bad rumors were circulated about me that I should have somehow, I'm not quite sure what people thought I should have done, but these students were kidnapped in the middle of the night. Somehow I should have known about it and been there and said, take me, never mind the students. But if you don't know about something, even if that was sensible, I couldn't have done it. Also had a little 7-year-old child with me. So that was a very difficult time. And how did I cope? All these people were being told these rumors. I had to, like the Bible says, it says, gird up your loins. Not quite sure what it means, but I felt I had to gird up my loins and go out and talk to all these different people who were being told lies. And they all said, Jane, we're so glad you came. We didn't believe it, but it's really nice to hear from you. It was a difficult time.
And what are the 3 words that, in your opinion, best describe women's contribution to science?
Patience. If it's a single word, it's difficult. Persistence is almost the same, isn't it? I think respect is an important word. Respect. So patience, respect, and the word I'm looking for is something, let your heart be involved, empathy. Those 3. But those should describe men in science too. It's what we all should bring to a scientific investigation, I believe.
Is there a cause you would really like us girls to stand up for?
Yeah, stand up for what you believe in. Stand up for your conviction. Don't let people talk you out of it. And again, my wise mother, she used to say to me, look, if you meet somebody who thinks quite differently from you, the first thing to do, listen to them. Try and find out where they're coming from. maybe you'll say after that, gosh, they do have a point. I never thought of that. And so not to be confrontational, but start a dialogue. And when I began to talk to the people running the primate labs, the chimp labs in America, the animal welfare movement, the animal rights people refused to speak to me. They said, how can you sit down at a table with those people? How can you drink a cup of coffee with them? And I said, but if you don't talk to them, how can you ever get anywhere? So what you stand up for is what you passionately believe in, but for heaven's sake, find out all the facts you can before you start any kind of... One of the problems with animal rights is they tend to use photographs from 30 years ago because they're very awful photographs, but they're sometimes procedures which are not being done anymore. And that immediately puts you on the wrong side.
Thanks.
Becomes fake news.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For answering our questions.
Could you sign some books?
Probably.
Thank you.
I think I'm quite good at that.
Thank you.
I've had lots of practice.